Now it is time for the main event of the evening. I would like to introduce to you a gentleman who could be thought of as Mr. Toastmaster. He is a member and founder of multiple clubs and is a wonderful speaker with a tremendously interesting and presumably humorous speech for you all tonight. Allow me to introduce Mr. Hovey with tonight's speech, A Deadwinter Carol.
Seasonal greetings to you, my fellow Toastmasters, barbarians, rogues, bards, and spellcasters. Tonight, I will tell you a tale of chilling peril, of an old miser's ordeal in A Deadwinter's Carol. Deadwinter is a hallowed time before the end of the year, a time for family, celebration, gifts, and cheer. This is the time when all adventurers head home, every high elf, orc, tiefling, and gnome. Our story begins on a particular Deadwinter's Eve in a quiet little village where there's not much to thieve. The busy streets by day are now silent at night. Every shop was closed. All was dark, except for one lone candlelight. It belonged to Bub Crockett, the clerk. Despite the festive occasion, he was still hard at work. Bub's employer is the wealthy dwarf, Elder Geezer Scrunch, the most infamous miser. Never ask him for free lunch. Scrunch amassed his great fortune in many a campaign. With his partner Marlin, they pillaged hordes of dragons slain. Together, they retired from venturing on quests, and they started a business of loans and collecting debts. Over the years, Marlin and Scrunch pinched every penny. Their shrewd business tactics made them despised by many. Nowadays, Marlin has long since passed, but that hasn't made Scrunch any less of a donkey's behind. He spends his days counting all of his pieces of gold, alone, friendless, and wretched, truth be told. On this particular night, he was counting once more when he heard a light knock upon his door. "What is it?" cried the cranky old coot. Bub Crockett appeared in his moth-bitten suit. "Please, sir, I was wondering," Bub managed to say, "could I have tomorrow off, as it's Deadwinter's Day? Between work and night school, I haven't had the time to spend with my children and that dear wife of mine." Bub knew his chances of leave were slimmest. Indeed, Scrunch looked down on his clerk and grimaced. "Ask for time off? The gall, the nerve! Don't you know this job is more than you deserve? Unearned money makes you no better than a common thug. That's all I have to say. Good night. Bah humbug." Poor Bub's hopes were crushed, and he resigned to his fate. "Very well, sir. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. With a tip of his hat, Bub departed. Braving the wintry cold, he went home downhearted. Meanwhile, Scrunch went back to counting his cash when suddenly his door was knocked open with a great big crash. In the doorway stood a tall, hulking undead. It wore a blood-red robe and had a skull for a head. It was a lich, a powerful being of animated remains. On each appendage, there were shackles of heavy gold chains. Scrunch looked up at the terrifying lich. He pleaded, don't kill me. I'm too rich. The lich replied, I'm not here to kill you, Scrunch, my darling. Don't you recognize me? Your old partner, Marlin? In my past life, I put money, wealth, and earthly treasures first. And for that, my soul is bound to this plane, accursed. Scrunch cowered and cried, Why have you come back? I'm but an old helpless dwarf. Wouldst thou attack? I have come to warn you to avoid a fate similar. Take heed of your avarice, for it holds you prisoner. Tonight, you will be tested by Deadwinter spirits 3. If you pass their judgment, only then your soul will be free. Scrunch shook his head and dismissed them with a shrug. My soul needs saving? Gibberish! Bah humbug! With that, Marlin glowed with a deathly luminescence. With a bright flash, the lich departed from Scrunch's presence. The clock struck midnight. All hands pointed to 12s. Scrunch put on his luxurious nightwear made by elves. He climbed into bed and fell fast asleep. He dreamed of more riches he has yet to reap. An hour passed, and the clock struck 1. As soon as the bell tolled, there was a sound like a gun. Bang! Whoa. In front of Scrunch, a terrifying specter appeared. Scrunch woke up with a disheveled beard. Who are you? Scrunch cried, confused and aghast. The specter answered, I am the ghost of Deadwinter past. Come with me as we explore events forgotten that may reveal the origins of the miser begotten. There was a sudden rush of wind. There was a change of scenery. What was once Scrunch's bedroom was now a field of greenery. Scrunch and the ghost stood on the top of a hill. Directly below them was a small party and a dragon going for the kill. Where have you brought me? What is this place? Don't you recognize your whereabouts? How about his face? The ghost pointed his wispy finger towards the party and at its youngest member. Scrunch gasped. The memories flooded back, and he cried, I remember. That's me. This is one of my earliest adventures. I look so young and handsome without my dentures. Indeed, this is your younger self. And look, it's your friends, Marlin and Kipper, the half-elf. Young Kipper was armed with sharp blades in his hands. He shouted to young Scrunch, and Marlin battle commands. I'll take on the dragon from the front and cause a distraction. Scrunch, you cast a healing spell on me for your action. Young Scrunch was just about to cast healing word when young Marlin stopped him and said, Haven't you heard? The dragon's treasure is left unguarded. Quick, let's go claim it while Kip is being bombarded. He's too low level. He's going to die regardless. It was at that moment young Scrunch made a decision, oh, so heartless. Old Scrunch watched his young doppelganger sneak away from the battle with Marlin and out of danger. The spirit turned to Scrunch. Why did you leave your friend Kipper to perish? Wasn't your friendship something to cherish? Kipper was a hot-headed noob, Scrunch rationalized. He was never going to keep up with us fashionable guys. Now Kipper was left alone with the dragon. Its odds of survival were quite staggering. With a terrific bite, the dragon ate Kipper with a crunch. Kipper, with his dying breath, cried, "Curse you, Marlin and Scrunch." The scene faded away, and Scrunch was back in his room, decorated with riches, spoils, and the occasional heirloom. Spirit, how could this have been my memory? I wasn't there to witness the last part of the story. The ghost nodded and said, "Very perceptive. This glimpse into the past was from my perspective. I am the ghost of your former ally. In life, I was Kipper. Yes, Kipper was I. Because of your treachery, I perished in that fight. And if you don't change your ways, you won't survive the night." With that, the air swirled and turned into a gust. The ghost of Kipper howled and dissolved into dust. Scrunch was left alone again once more. He climbed back into bed and soon began to snore. Another hour passed and the clock struck 2. This time, the window burst open and a second ghost came through. Scrunch angrily cried, "Who barges in here without my consent?" The ghost replied, "It is I, the ghost of Deadwinter present. Tonight, I shall show you things as they are. In fact, we won't even have to travel too far." Scrunch and the ghost were instantly transported in front of a small house with several windows all boarded. Scrunch peered through the cracks to see what was inside. It was Bub Crockett's home, to his surprise. Bub Crockett was inside with his wife, who was carefully cutting a peanut with a knife. Scrunch asked, "Why did you bring me to my clerk's filthy hovel?" The ghost replied, "To show you that he hasn't even coal to shovel. The meager salary he receives from you is barely enough for his family to make do." Scrunch sneered at the ghost and had a mind to scoff. But then he heard the sound of the tiniest cough. A child with a crutch came into the room, all hobbling. "Who's that sickly child?" "That is Tiny Tim, the goblin." Tiny Tim tripped and fell flat on his nose. Bob sprang up and held the dear child close. "I fear Tiny Tim will not live to see Deadwinter morning. Surely tomorrow, Bub's family will be mourning." Bob Crockett's house faded away, and back to Scrunch's house they returned. The ghost asked Scrunch, "Well, what have you learned?" "I didn't know my clerk adopted a little goblin baby, but I do suppose I feel some sympathy for Tiny Tim. Maybe." The ghost replied, "Tiny Tim's story is utterly tragic. His parents were wantonly slain by magic. It was your partner Marlin, that bloodthirsty barbarian, who slew indiscriminately, leaving a trail of carrion." Scrunch asked the ghost, "How do you know Tiny Tim's history?" "Because in life, I was Tiny Tim's mother. There's no mystery." The ghost pointed its finger at Scrunch's head. "If Tiny Tim dies tonight, you will surely also be dead." After this proclamation, the ghost faded to nothing, leaving Scrunch alone, wondering if she was bluffing. Scrunch cursed. Confounded that marlin. I hope he's eating crow. That's what you get for being a murder hobo. Scrunch went back to bed and got all snug. He muttered, No way am I dying tonight. Ah, humbug. Time went by, and this time, Scrunch stayed awake. He wondered if he'll ever catch a break. The final hour passed, and the clock struck 3. A cold fog enveloped Scrunch in his nightie. Ah! Scrunch cried, and he found himself transported again to a strange and otherworldly plane. Scrunch walked around and found 4 corners and edges. All was utterly dark below the ledges. Scrunch realized he was somehow on a giant square table. He surmised if he jumped off, it certainly would be fatal. Then, rising from an edge, was a colossal cloaked figure. In a loud, booming voice, it spoke, I am the ghost of Deadwinter Future. The ghost laid down a large paper note at Scrunch's feet. Scrunch looked down and read Scrunch's character sheet. On the sheet, there was vast amounts of dinero, but the number on current hit points was 0. At that moment, Scrunch recalled a particular myth of an all-powerful being no deity could contend with, wielding a fate-controlling 20-sided gem. This being was a dungeon master, an omnipotent DM. Elder Geezer Scrunch, the giant DM roared at the tiny dwarf below. Prepare to make your death-saving throw. The DM rolled its titanic D20 die. With each bounce, it shook the table and the sky. Scrunch was terrified and fell from the tremors. Finally, the die came to rest with a number displayed in its center. What's this? A 1? That's a critical fail. Scrunch's face fell, and he went pale. Scrunch got to his knees and pleaded his case. Please, Mr. Ghost, I beg you, show some grace. I'll be good. I'll be generous. I promise I will be. I'll change my ways. Please don't kill me. The giant DM stared at the cowering PC Plenty. Then it once again tossed its large D20. This time, the D20 rolled straight to Scrunch in a rush. Scrunch cried and put up his hands over his eyes and prepared to be crushed. But the impact Scrunch expected never came. Scrunch opened his eyes. He was in his bedroom once again. Daylight bleeded through his open window. Outside, the roofs were covered in thick snow. Scrunch looked out the window and saw a young fellow. His hat was dark gray and his pants were yellow. Quick, laddie, tell me, what day is this? Why, it's Deadwinter's day, of course. Isn't it bliss? Scrunch laughed and cheered in glee. He had survived the Deadwinter Ghosts 3. Scrunch quickly raked his fortune into bags of holding, every jewel, every treasure, every silver and gold thing. He ran all the way to Bub Crockett's cottage, an impressive physical feat for one in his dotage. He knocked, and Bub opened the door. Why, sir, what have you come to my home for? Scrunch shouted, Merry Deadwinter, my dear Crockets. He proceeded to empty his fortune into his clerk's pockets. Scrunch went on to promote Bub from clerk to assessor. Furthermore, he named him his successor. For Tiny Tim, Scrunch hired doctors to give him the best of care. Tiny Tim recovered, and Scrunch named him his heir. And thusly, Scrunch the miser became Scrunch the kind. He left his life of avarice fully behind. Now, you might think that this is just another allegory, but you still don't know the complete story. For you see, Bub Crockett was studying to be a necro savant. On Deadwinter's Eve, his employer he decided to haunt. With his necromancy powers, Bub called upon the undead to torment Scrunch and fill him with dread. His ultimate plan was to steal all of Scrunch's treasure in return for all those years of hard work and no pleasure. So, what is the real moral of our story? The answer? Never, ever, ever piss off a necromancer.